Now, let's talk a little bit of America here because I know that we could, bore Australia for hours and hours talking about it, but let's entertain Australia for a few minutes here because you remember when those lasers were being fired into the eyes of police in Portland, Oregon, there were permanent eye damage that happened as a result of this. These are industrial level stuff. These are the sorts of things that if you fire them into the sky in Australia and pointed them at a plane, you would be charged, all right? Well, an independent journalist gave evidence today at a Senate inquiry. He's a bloke who has been on the ground reporting on what has been going in terms of the organisation of the different types of protests. Now, you may have heard of Antifa. Certainly, if you watch The Outsiders, like I know so many of you do, you know what we're talking about, the supposedly anti-fascist fascists. But, of course, they use the useful idiots that are out there for the good cause as the Trojan horse to do really bad things. This bloke has seen it with his own eyes, and he was part of his evidence to a Senate inquiry in Washington today.
I have worked undercover for months in Portland and other cities, and I've seen with my own eyes how hundreds of so-called protesters work together to carry out acts of organized criminality against government and civilians. Both violent and nonviolent participants play a role. For example, Antifa, by their own admission, depend on mass numbers of peaceful protesters to act as human shields. Those privy to the organizational workings are divided into units, one to monitor police movement, one for street medics, one for vandals and arsonists, and so on. They coordinate on encrypted chat applications like Signal because they are extremely difficult for law enforcement to monitor.
Now, it was powerful. It's a very long piece of evidence, and I'll make sure I post it up on our Facebook page because you should sit back. This guy has done great reporting on all this, but of course, because he is telling the truth about the mob, he will of course be attacked by the mob, not allowed to talk about him, not allowed to interview him. He wrote this tweet 5 years ago, you know, the usual game that gets played here. But at the end of the hearing, there was this exchange because none of the Democrats would turn around and have a go at Antifa. Because, of course, they're more than happy for them to be causing the trouble because, of course, they can then point and say, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Look at all the crazy stuff that's happening on the streets. Here was an exchange between Ted Cruz, the Republican, and a senator from the Democrats.
So I hope this is the end of this hearing, Mr. Chairman, and that we don't have to listen to any more of your rhetorical speeches. Thank you very much. I'm leaving.
Well, I appreciate the, as always, kind and uplifting words of Senator Hirono. And I would also note that throughout her remarks, she still did not say a negative word about Antifa, nor has any Democrat here. They instead engage in a political game where they depend. You're welcome to say something negative about Antifa right now.
I think that I've covered the subject quite well. You are not
Okay,
listening.
she declined to speak, so that is the position of the Democratic Party.
Now, let's talk about this a little bit, James, because, look, quite obviously there is not a direct line between the anarchists in the street and the Democrats, but there is a squiggly line, which is...
It's dotted and the dots are very close together, Paul.
Correct, yeah. But it's this thing where, so you get the mayor of Seattle saying Summer of Love when they take over the streets, you get a governor who tells the police not to enforce things, you get senators who turn around and pretend that lasers being fired into the eyes of federal law enforcement...
And blinding them permanently, some of them.
This is it. Yep. While simultaneously calling the same people, stormtroopers and all the other Nazi language here. How important is what we heard today, particularly from that first bloke, about how organised this stuff is?
So the first bloke, Andy Ngo, is a real hero of journalism. He's an independent journalist who now does stuff for the Wall Street Journal and some other websites. But he has put his body on the line for years, documenting the lawlessness of Antifa in Portland and how the mayor and the city government there has completely refused to do anything about them. But I'll tell you what, the joke is absolutely on the Democrats, because the Democrats think, oh, well, this is good because more chaos is good for them. But, you know, these guys are so far left. They're the Jacobins of this revolution. And so Ted Wheeler, the mayor of Portland, woker than woke, was out there trying to march with them a couple of weeks ago, and they ran him off and called him a pig and a fascist. These people are not the Democrats, friend, and the more they let them go and roll and run this sort of thing, the more people are going to want, I think, law and order and a return to sanity, because they know that, their businesses aren't going to survive, their homes aren't going to survive. You look at gun and ammo sales in the United States right now, people are really, really scared that this is getting out of control.
Well, also, I mean, what's really interesting to me about this too, Michael, is that if you won't attack the most extreme parts of what people will ascribe to be your movement or your side of politics, then of course they get to define you as being able to be running with those people. Now, I believe that, look, a lot more message discipline is going to be needed by the president here, but I believe that if he makes the election or tries to make the election about defend versus defund law enforcement, people in the suburbs are going to back that and back it big time, because these people are the kooks.
Yeah, you think he needs to be a bit more on message, your mate, from time to time, do you?
Yeah, I'll have a chat.
Look, this is why, Paul, it's very hard to predict what will happen in this presidential election. We know all the things about Trump. We know all of Biden's problems, which will probably only get worse because he's basically doesn't even know where he is these days. And how will that play out? How will that play out in the election? But this is the sleeping giant of this campaign, which is the whole law and order issue. And, Biden has not condemned Antifa in any strong language. As we know, almost every one of the lockdown cities, 24 of the 25, were run by the Democratic Party. Portland is a Democrat. They're run by the Democrats. All the worst violence was in Democrat-controlled cities. And if middle America takes the view that, boy, this old man, poor old Joe Biden, is not going to be able to impose any kind of control on the country. And if Trump does get back on message, God willing that he gets on message on this issue, that is probably his best chance of re-election, Paul.